nothing worse than spending a lot of time knitting a project only to have a bind off on the top of your toe-up sock that just isn't stretchy enough for the sock to comfortably pull up over your foot and fit around your calf. So I'm going to show you a bind off that I like to use for any kind of project that I want to have a stretchy edge for. And I've seen this talked about in other books and places, sometimes called an Icelandic bind off or a Russian bind off. And I usually just call it a stretchy bind off because I find that to be the most descriptive. So basically, I'm just going to start by knitting 2 stitches. And if you do a traditional bind off, as most people learned, after you have 2 stitches on the right needle, you reach your left needle into the one that's furthest away and you pull it over and drop it off. So we're not going to do that in this bind off, but we are going to work when we have 2 stitches on the right hand needle. We're going to take the left hand needle, we're going to put it back into the front of those 2 stitches, and then I'm going to knit them together. And then I'm going to knit one more, or purl one more in this case, because you can work this bind off in pattern. So that is, whenever I come to a purl stitch, before I do the bind off portion, I'll purl that stitch. When I come to a knit stitch, I'll knit it. So I've purled that. Now I have 2 stitches on my right needle, so I insert the left needle into the front of both of them, and I knit them together. So the first part's where you change to knit or purl to match whatever the next stitch is. And the second part, you always knit them together. So we'll purl another stitch, and then I put my, see how I put my yarn to the back when I go to insert my left needle into the front of them, because I need the yarn in the back to knit them together. And when I have to purl, I'll pull it in the front. Of course, you can work this entire bind off knit-wise. You don't have to work it in pattern where you're knitting and purling, but I like the look of that just a little bit better than working it as knits all the way around. Now I'm up to a knit stitch, so I will work it as a knit though. And so I just keep going around, either knitting or purling the stitch as necessary, and then whenever I have those 2 stitches on the right needle, I knit them together. And that's all there is to it. I'm just going to go all the way around, continuing in the same fashion, and when I get to the last stitch, I'll show you how we fasten that off because it's a little bit different than what you might be used to. Okay, so I've gone all the way around with the process that I showed you, and now I'm just going to insert the left needle into those last 2 stitches on my right needle and knit them together. And then I am not going to put the tail of the yarn through this loop. What I'm going to do is cut my yarn, and normally what we would do is feed the tail of it through that loop, but instead we're just going to put a needle or a finger in that loop and yank it and then fasten it off that way. And that's all there is to that. I want to show you how to end the top of the sock so that the end of the cast off is virtually invisible, because when you finish it up here, you've got a gap between the last stitch you made and the first stitch of the round. And so what we're going to do is look at the top of this and see how we have chains going across the top of the cast off or bind off edge. We have the same thing on the other side. What we want to do is use the tapestry needle to sew a stitch that looks like one of those chains. So the thread, the way we pulled the yarn, it comes right out of the center of this chain. And we're going to go into the first whole chain on the other side and just go through both legs of it. Again, I'll hold these other strings out of the way because they're not part of the finishing. We're going to use the tail that we finished the binding off with. And I'm going to pull it through the 2 legs of that stitch, and then I can go back up through the center of the very last stitch of the bind off. And can you see how that's closed it up completely invisibly? And when I want to get rid of that end, I'll just go onto the wrong side, which will be on the inside of the sock. I'll go down through the center of the next stitch, and then I will weave that end in. And there you can see how it's just a smooth join all the way through.